Steelers Nation. You are now listening to Good Steelers Morning, your daily dose of Pittsburgh Steelers news, rumors, and everything black and gold. Now, here is your host, Justin Otstad.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is May 6, 2024. It is a new week of Good Steelers Morning. And unfortunately, this weekend was pretty dry in the news department. However, we can get back on track discussing all the draft picks from the Steelers from the 2024 NFL Draft. And of course, we now have on the list Zach Frazier, the center that we picked, and thank God that is what we went with at 51. But before we get into that, I wanted to kind of fill you guys in with some news in regards to the network. We are adding a new podcast sometime within the next week. You guys will be able to find links in the description at the appropriate time. But I'm giving you a heads up, if you are a Pirates fan, which God bless you if you are, because it's been rough, and it's been rough for a very long time. I have a new podcast coming out called Bucks Morning Brew, which will be covering the Pittsburgh Pirates in the same fashion that I cover the Pittsburgh Steelers here on Good Steelers Morning. And again, that'll be starting probably within the next week or so. The second thing I want to get into is, may notice my voice may sound a little strange. I'm not sure yet. PA weather's been kind of rough. And so I've been dealing with, some allergy issues because of the weather changes. But hopefully everything sounds good. You guys can let me know in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. That said, again, this episode won't be too long. We're just going to get into Zach Frazier, his background, and I'll give you guys my thoughts on where I see him fitting in with the Steelers' offensive line. And it won't be too hard because, the Pittsburgh Steelers had Kendrick Green as their center for a few years, which we don't really need to dive too deep into that. You guys all know how much of a train wreck that was. But I'll say it for the millionth time in my online career presence, whatever. They passed on Creed Humphrey twice, and we saw the results of that. And the results of that was the likes of Kendrick Green. And so coming into this draft, there was a few names on my list of centers that needed to be considered for the Steelers. And Zach Frazier happened to be one of them. In fact, early on, Zach really wasn't at the top of my list. That belonged to Powers. But as the process continued, and I started to dig a lot more into things, Zach Frazier started to make a little bit more sense, considering that we all knew that in that first round, center wasn't really looking realistic because it was going to be known that centers were probably going to be available in the second round. Now, much like everybody else, I assumed the Steelers would have to trade up in order to get Frazier or even Powers. Those were the only two names that, in my opinion, made sense to do so. Now, thankfully, the Steelers did not have to do that. In fact, they didn't have to do that at all to get any of the players that they got in the draft, which I said this once and I'll say it again. And maybe you guys agree or don't agree. I'm sure you do because you're Steelers fans. This has to be one of the best Steelers drafts in recent memory. Now, hopefully that plays out going into the future and this doesn't end up being another draft class like the Devin Bush class. But, Zach Frazier, second round, number 51, out of West Virginia, 6'2", 313 pounds, 22 years old, out of Fairmount, West Virginia. The Steelers' new rookie center is set to make, in my opinion, a significant impact in both the run game and pass protection for the team in 2024. I know there's a lot of discussions on whether or not he's going to be the starter. I'll tell you now, I think not starting him would be a big mistake. And I think that's one of the things that the Steelers have done under Mike Tomlin, where they don't like to start rookies, although they have. But most of the time, they try to keep the rookies on the bench until, like, I don't know, week 3, week 4, whatever it may be. I think that's something that needs to change in certain regards. This has to be one of those exceptions, because we don't want to have guys that are playing the center position and that's not their actual position. We don't want right guards playing center. We don't want to, right tackles playing center. I think Frazier should be the guy from the start, and I think he's capable. Now, Frazier is a tough center who was a 4-time state champion wrestler in West Virginia, and he's known for his play strength, which makes him a force in the run game. He has the ability to steer and control players as a run blocker, and that allows him to open up lanes, which is going to benefit the Steelers, specifically Najee Harris, who should have got his 5th-year option picked up, by the way. Go check that episode out if you missed it. I went into a lot of details as to why. And of course, Jaylen Warren, who's going to absolutely kill it this year, I have no doubts. Especially considering both of those men are in contract years. And one of them is going to get extended, but hopefully both. And Frazier is going to play a big, massive role in that run game. And of course, in pass protection. Ramon Foster said on a recent episode of the Ramon Foster Show, he says his only drawback as far as Zach Frazier goes is he does like to use his grappling from time to time, not in the holding sense, but in the NFL, he likes to grab and throw dudes to the ground. He can do that once he builds up his reputation in the NFL, but those kinds of things get somewhat called in games. Now, of course, I'm sure Foster knows this very well. He's just pointing out an obvious flaw, because not everything can't be great all the time. We have to mention these things. This is something that Frazier is going to be able to work on through coaching throughout the summer, going into training camp, and then, of course, going into preseason, which, by the way, this is going to sound completely random, but the NFL, if the NFL is actually thinking about getting rid of preseason, they're crazy. I know for some fans it's boring, it's pointless to them, but it's absolutely necessary for the game and for team building and for guys getting prepared for the actual regular season where things count and matter. And so, yeah, this is one of those cases. A guy like Frazier coming into the league, into the NFL, he's going to need to get some experience, and it would make more sense to do so in a preseason fashion where things don't count against the team and these guys can start to gel together. It's one of my biggest pet peeves of those discussions that come up all the time of not necessarily changing the game, but removing things from the game that don't need to be removed, especially in the sense that you're just trying to add more regular season games. And your whole argument of, I'm going on a tangent here, your whole argument of keeping players safe just doesn't really connect when you're talking about adding games and removing preseason games. It makes no sense. But I'll get off that. Frazier would benefit from coaching. And yeah, that is something that is a concern coming into the league, because flags, as you guys know, penalties are drive killers, and that's something that all teams deal with. Steelers, obviously, no exception there. And we definitely coming into this season, we all, I think, feel like the offensive line has now been improved, which, if we're being honest, doesn't really say a lot. Mason Cole was the center last season. And of course, as I mentioned, Kendrick Green was the guy prior to that. And we haven't had a guy since Pouncey. And now we get Frazier, and the outlook looks pretty bright. And so overall, what is my feeling? How do I feel about the Steelers picking Frazier? I think you guys already know. A+ in my books. Of course, that'll depend on how things play out over the years, but looking at it now, the pick was necessary. It was a little ballsy to wait for him to drop to 51 because that wasn't a guarantee. And I do think the Steelers made comments about them being interested in trading up to get Frazier. And of course, that didn't work out. But a little bit ballsy of them to just comfortably wait around, especially when Washington was on the board and we all thought they might have went center, but they didn't. And so Frazier, yeah, he's going to change the run game. I think he's going to improve it in many ways. He feels like a Steeler. It makes all the sense in the world, and I cannot wait to see how all these things play out in the coming months. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be your Monday episode. I'm going to get on out of here. We will be back tomorrow, Tuesday morning. Whether or not we'll be talking about the next draft pick on this list, I don't know. We'll see. Might be a slow news week, or maybe we get some wide receiver news. I don't know. But until then, Steelers Nation, I'm Justin Ostad. This is Good Steelers Morning. You guys enjoy the rest of your day.